So now, without any further ado, I would like to commence the first session and discuss the skills development nexus in EU workplaces. We will hear about the state of the art of learning opportunities in European workplaces, and also we will look at the future scenarios of skills development. And we have two presentations from two set of colleagues who have been working extensively on these topics in over the past years. So Giovanni Russo is an expert in skills and workplaces, while Lidia Salvatore, she's an expert in VET for adults and apprenticeship. So as you know, your presentation should last a maximum 25 minutes, so that we can also dedicate a few minutes to the Q&A from the audience. And I will also try to signal when you have 1 and 5 minutes left. So we can now start with the first presentation on motivating upskilling in EU workplaces. Giovanni will guide us through some evidence from both the European Company Survey and the European Training and Learning Survey, and he will discuss how skills development and workplace learning can enhance job quality and productivity, translating more generally into higher competitiveness. So over to you, Giovanni. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Good afternoon. And today, I'll do 3 things. First of all, I will lay out a sort of a framework you can use when thinking about how to link upskilling and skills development in companies to competitiveness. Then we look at this evidence that CEDEFOP has gathered through various surveys about the relationship we'll identify, and then I'll conclude. So okay. So this is the starting point, and let me start you from the end. Okay. So we start from, what is the dot? We need a cut. No. Okay. I can make it. Yeah, this is it. So we start from the end. This the relationship here. We have a relationship between how to, the starting point at the center here, we have, what is the dot here? Companies actually leveraging human capital to attain competitive advantage. So this is the core of the issue here. How to do that, and what needs to be done, and how can you link this human capital to competitiveness. So this is the Industry 5.0 framework, if you like, in a sense. It revolves around human centricity. I mean, Industry 5.0 is broader than that, and here we focus on human centricity in the workplace, okay? So it is really related. Now, to look at the link to competitiveness, I have to start you off from the end here. So these are the 2 channels. Lydia, you can look it there. Oh, no, you can't. Yeah, exactly. So these are the 2 channels through which human resources can contribute directly to competitiveness. This is the realm of workplace innovation. This is the realm of employee-driven innovation. So basically, employees can help the organization identifying areas or pockets of improvements where efficiency can be improved, and they can suggest improvements in the design of the product, in the way the product or service is delivered. They can branch out to downstreams to customer, but also upstream to suppliers. Now, the other thing they can do is helping with the smooth unfolding of operation. So whenever things happens, employees are very useful in addressing the situation, avoiding that the hiccup will have very big consequences on the productions and on competitiveness in the end. one way to think about it is a power outage, and so when things happen, employees can actually deploy their abilities in order to prevent this power outage to actually spill over and create bigger damage than what it needs to. So how can employees do this is when they actually understand operations really, really well. And so in order to do this, employees must invest in learning what the organization does and how it does it. And they need to invest in this because they need two types of knowledge. One is the ability to do things right. So this is the technical knowledge. And then is the ability to do the right thing. And this is understanding what is happening. So for example, when problems arise in organizations, sometimes these problems are, let's say, contained in a team. So the solution affects only team members. But you can imagine that there are situations where these situations actually spans over different teams, different departments. And so when having a decision to make and when making a decision how to solve these hiccups, they also have to take into account what are the stakeholders affected by these decisions. And you might have workers downstreams, workers upstreams, and it can go also beyond the boundary of the firm. It can also involve customer again and suppliers. It involves also management, because whenever you propose a solution, you need to take the interest of the organization in mind. So they have to have this double type of knowledge, the knowledge of do things right, but also the ability to understand what are the stakeholders involved and affected by their decision making. So to gather this knowledge, there is a process of investments, and there are different processes. One is directly self-directed by the employees, but the other is supported by the organizations. Now, to understand how this process of learning actually take place, we have to move to this part, the employment relationship. So basically how to activate people's skills. How do you do that? You cannot use the labor contract because it's really very minimal. And so what happened is a sort of a relationship that the company established with its workers, and is a kind of a combination of two elements. One is the requirements, which is actually what the organization expects from its workers. And the other is the inducements. And this is a broadly defined group of incentives. And I actually use a different words on purpose, because when we say incentives, we think about monetary incentive right away. And so it's pay for performance. Instead, this is a broader thing. So here you can have, for example, an interesting mission and vision statement. You can think about providing interesting jobs. You can also think about providing career opportunities. These are all inducements. So these are broad incentives that help workers meet the requirements. The requirements, so when the company managed to strike this balance, and if you want to use skills to build your competitive advantage, then of course these requirements are going to be high. And so to help workers meet these high requirements, you also have to give or provide a high level of inducement, okay? If you manage to keep this balance, then the outcome is engagement. When you have engagement, then people start to have produced and enact these organizational citizenship behaviors, which is a broad set of behaviors that help the organization achieve its goals. The organization can also, these are voluntary behaviors. So this is something that employees by themselves enact. But the organization can still steer this. In a sense, you cannot use the job description because once in the job description, it's no longer voluntary. So you have to use different channels, more indirect channels. This is the organizational culture. This is the value of the organization. This is the mission of the organization. And if you have an organization where you say, this is a place where we learn, this is a normative thing. It's not written in the job description, but it's organizational culture. This is a place where we say it is important that you do your job well. The quality of your job is really important. So this type of statement in the organizational culture will help steer workers towards the production of enactment of the right type of the behaviors that are, let's say, important for the organization at that moment. Now, one central piece of the organization of these behaviors is cooperation between workers. And when workers cooperate, a nice thing happens. Their individual human capital gels, and it becomes an organizational resources. It's difficult to base competitive advantage on the human capital of individual workers. You can base their competitive advantage on the human capital of your workforce. And so you make this human capital, you have to make this human capital gel together, and you do it through organizational citizen behavior because it helps employers cooperate. And one outcome of this cooperation is the sharing of information, and the other outcome of information is self-initiated learning. So workers by themselves start to try to understand how the organization works and what can they do to improve this, the organization. But we see that learning is the outcome of different processes. This is only one process. The employment relationship has also a direct and indirect effect on learning, because on the one hand, training is important. In a sense, when you think about working in a company, you need to have a certain skill levels to actually perform your duty. Now, one form of inducement is to provide the training that you need in order to be at that level. Okay? So directly from this balance between requirements and inducement comes training in case of underskilling. Then you have an indirect effect because the employment relationships is a long-term project. So it is very difficult for workers to invest in learning how organization works if you have only a time horizon of 6 months to 2 years. And then you have to move, and all this knowledge that you acknowledge cannot be used because this is firm specific, okay? So it has very little value in other organizations. So it gives this long-term perspective that helps learning. Finally, there is technology. If you base your competitive advantage on human capital, then you need to deploy technology in a way that enhances worker capabilities. And this has two effects. One, if they have more capabilities, you can design more complex jobs. You can give them more complex tasks to do. And the other is you provide training, because it is in the direct interest of the organization to provide workers with the training to use this technology. And so you see that all this training and self-initiated learning ends up in this big, the outcome of all these processes is skills development, which feeds into the understanding of how the organization works, and then follows productivity. Also, you can see that when you have a workforce that actually understands how the organization works and is motivated to do so, and you give them the opportunity to tackle complex problems, then you have value creation, and you create value through people, and this feeds into competitiveness. Okay, so this is a kind of a general framework that you can use to think about this. Now, what you actually see is that all these variables are organically linked, and you can think about them as immersed in something that sort of a liquid, which is the organizational culture. Okay? So now, while we were presenting this framework, what we see, we have words like employee support, motivation and engagement, long-term relationship, training and learning. So all these are features of job quality. So when you actually have companies competing or basing their competitive advantage on their worker skills, they tend to provide jobs of high quality. Now, the evidence that we have collected using the CEDEFOP Eurofound European Company Survey is that we actually have identified this employment relationship. And using these are results on companies, so in European establishments, and we have identified 4 types of different relationships. We have a low requirement, low inducement. We have a moderate requirement, more inducement, and a high requirement, higher inducement. These are balanced relationships, if you want. They ask little, they give little. They ask a lot, they provide a lot. And then we have an imbalanced relationship, which is high requirements and moderate inducements. They require a lot, but they support not enough. Now, we have good news in the sense that only a very small group of 13% of companies, of European establishments, have this low requirements and low inducement type of employment relationship. And this is a good news. We also have a bad news. that the number of, the share of establishments having a higher requirements and higher inducement is also not much higher. It's only 1 in 5. So. The rest is stuck in the middle. So they are in the middle of the Ford. We have a 30% moderate requirement, moderate inducement, but the largest group is actually the imbalanced relationship, when they ask more than what they provide to support. We see that this employment relationship has the employment relationship is related to job complexity. Here we have 2 graphs. So each of these columns is a different type of employment relationship. So this is the low-low, this is the mid-mid, high imbalance, and this is the high-high. The composition of these bars represent various types of establishments. And in this graph, we talk about problem solving, and this one is about autonomy. So if you look at the low-low employment relationship, establishment in this group, we see 60% of these establishments, more or less, have less than 20% of their jobs asking or providing occasion for problem solving. A very little percentage have a share of very little percentage of this establishment has more than 80% of jobs providing occasion for problem solving. And if you look at autonomy, the low-low employment establishment with a low-low employment relationship, you see that almost 45% have less than 20% of job providing autonomy. Now, as you move from the low-low to the high-high, you see that the percentage of establishment with a very little percentage of job providing opportunity for autonomy and problem solving drops. So you see it goes from 60% to 25, no 30, what is it, 30, 22, 25%. And the percentage of establishment with a very high percentage of jobs asking for problem solving expands. So this suggests that there is a positive relationship here between the type of establishment, the employment relationship that you establish, and the job complexity which is required or offered in these companies. The employment relationship has also is also linked to other outcomes. So we see that as you move from the low inducement, low requirements to the high inducement, high requirements employment relationship, you tend to have better talent retention. So turnover is low. And this is the effect on the long-term relationship. If turnover is low, then you tend to have long-term relationships. You have a higher engagement, more training provisions, and a stronger recruitment in the sense that they have less trouble attracting talent. Now we move to a different part. Now we move to the part about skills development. So it's learning. That is central to the development of the ability to actually support competitiveness. And we use the European Training and Learning Survey. We have 2 different, we actually distinguish between learning as a process and learning as an outcome. Learning as a process is the participation in learning activities, and we have an extensive margin, so it's the frequency of participation. We don't have the intensity in the sense that how many hours are spent on this. We distinguish between employer organized, which is off-the-job training and on-the-job training, and self-initiated learning. So this is informal learning, learning by doing, participation in training initiated by the employees, trial and error, and all these things. Now, we collapse all these activities in an index of learning effort, if you want to. And now we look at the relationship between the most important variable that relate to skills development and participation in learning activities. Sorry, before you do that, this is the learning as an outcome. So we developed this scale where we actually have items measuring, or trying to measure, how people improve in their understanding of what is their job, on how to do their job and the meaning of their job, okay? We completed these 11 items with a catch-all measure that trying to assess the overall the skills development over the past year. Now, this is our learning as an outcome, and we call it skill development. And now we have the results. And this is also the concluding slide. So the three most important elements are this one: motivation, developmental needs, and job complexity. These are the three most important variables which are linked directly to skill development and also indirectly to skill development through learning effort. So these three variables, motivation, developmental needs, and job complexity, affect both the participation in learning effort and control for that skills development. So they have both a direct and indirect effect. Motivations, we treated motivation in a very, let's say, broad sense. We acknowledge that motivation can be internally controlled. So this is the intrinsic motivation, if you want. So is adherence between collinearity between personal value and vision and missions, but also, let's say, a natural interest for a job. And we also recognize that motivation can be externally controlled. Because it can be controlled by, for example, incentives. So this is typically when you do things in order to get higher pay or promotions, or because there are social norms actually imposing the idea that you have to learn. All these elements are in the motivation, so this is not a personal feature. It is the result of the interaction of the individual with his environment at work. Then we have developmental needs, which are two types of developmental needs. One is simply underskilling. I'm not yet at the level, so I need to be to get there. And this developmental need drives skill development and participation in learning activity, but also induced. And every time the organization changes the tasks in a certain jobs, it induces a certain state of underskilling, which then triggers both skill development and participation in learning. We see that managerial support is important, not so much directly to influence the skill development, but indirectly influencing the participation in learning activities. And now we look at the split of these self-initiated and employer-organized activities, and then we see for self-initiated learning activities, organizational citizen behavior is really important. When people perform this type of behavior, they also engage in learning. While for employer-organized learning activity, the introduction of new technologies and work processes is important. So when these things are introduced in the workplace, there is an uptick in the frequency of participation in employer-organized learning. Now, you can think about these as independent variable, and you can start thinking, okay, what do I do first? What I move first? What is most important to do? Where is the chicken? Where is the egg? But one thing it is important to remember is that all these variables are actually organically interlinked and they support each other. And so instead of thinking of them as separate actions that you actually can do, you can think about what is behind them, that there is a learning culture. And if you deploy a learning culture, all these variables will move together automatically, organically. And so here is the message for policy making, is if there is a way that we can encourage the adoption of this type of cultures, then most of the things that we actually want will follow. And with this, I finished. Thank you.
So now I would like to move to the next item of this session, because after having learned about the current skills development and learning opportunities, we will now look to the future and listen to this presentation on the future of continuing skills development. So Lidia Salvatore will illustrate potential opportunities and challenges in continuing skills development by exploring possible pathways to 2040. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Giulia, and So I move with this, right? Okay, lovely, thank you. So good afternoon also from my side, and welcome. So as Julia mentioned, I'll be presenting you briefly some of the findings of a foresight study that we just completed at the end of last year that tried to look at the future of continuing skill development. And in particular today, I will be focusing on 4 different scenarios that we have elaborated throughout this foresight exercise. Maybe the first caveat that I would like to say that this is not a forecast. You know, it's a really, our foresight study was a structured way of thinking about the future so that whichever future arrives, then we are not caught off guard. So, yes, perfect. I think maybe I don't really need to go through these slides in detail because we've already discussed in the opening quite in depth, like previous speaker already touched upon why continuous skill development, thinking of the future is essential, what are the main challenges and trends coming up for the future. Antonio already mentioned earlier in his closing remarks about you know, this tension that we have with the traditional CVET system that is no longer equipped by itself only to respond to the changing and evolving needs of the workplace and the new technologies. We have discussed how you know, like learning needs to take place at work more and more often, and also how workplace learning, learning in communities, as well as digital learning platforms, learning that occurs self-directed through digital learning platform already takes place, but is not yet enough recognized by and leveraged by skill policies. So I think I would only, on this slide, maybe the only thing I would like to highlight and mention is that in our study, we looked at the AI deployment and the future of AI as the real wild card, meaning the most influential yet most unpredictable force which will shape skills development up to 2040. So in terms of this study, we as I said, the underlined aim is to look at the future and try to understand early enough what are future opportunities, but also identify possible threats before these are really locked in, so that we can they can really help us, support us, shape a future vision for continuing skills development up to 2040. So the exercise ran over 2 years, and it was multi-phased participatory process, meaning that we engaged with different experts, futurists, but also representative from the policymakers at different levels, so national, regional, and European, then representative from the social partners at different levels as well, representative from training providers and career guidance providers, as well as representative from the civil society organization. The foresight took, you know, the approach of a regular foresight exercise, meaning the 3-step of scenario building, scenario exploration, and vision building. And today I'll be focusing on the scenario building. So just very briefly on the, you know, how we created this scenario. Basically, we started with identification of trends most likely to shape the future of continuing skills development up to 2040. We did this analyzing them and identifying them using the dimension of social, technological, economic, environmental, political, and value dimension. So out of this, we ended up with 21 trends that then we discussed throughout an expert workshop. Then these trends were analyzed in terms of their impact on each other. And how uncertain how their evolution might be uncertain in the future, so how they might evolve in the future. And then out of this exercise, we were able to identify through morphological analysis 4 distinct evolution paths. These were the basis for our scenario outlines. which we then developed into 4 different and distinct scenarios for 2040, also after validation through a semi-Delphi survey. So moving into the actual scenarios, I think the overarching question that we asked ourselves in the exercise was like, whether this future will empower people or actually deepen inequality. And what we came up with are really 4 structured stories for 2040. And I want to reiterate this. We call them scenarios, but these are really structured stories, meaning that these are exploratory tools. They're not predictions. Really, they help us think about the future and get ready for the future. But in no way we came out of the exercise or we expect that any of this future will take place exactly as it is. We just wanted to open up our mind and think, what are the areas we want to invest? What do we want to safeguard? What do we need to protect against, actually, thinking of the future? So these are the type of questions that we asked ourselves. And so we came out with 4 very different scenarios. So we span from a very positive scenario where abundance is shared, the labor market is tight, and growth in AI really creates more jobs than workers, and the benefits of this technological deployment are really shared broadly across the workforce. However, then we also moved to another scenario, scenario B, where actually we have a 2-tier workforce. Here we see that state unemployment withdraw from workforce development, and workers are really split into those who thrive on their individual responsibility and those that instead are left behind without any type of support or safety net. We also have a scenario that is a bit like things sort of like remain the same. So here the AI uptake is modest and uneven, so changes are easily absorbed into existing systems. But this is also a scenario where we see a bit of missed potential, because all the positive transformative gains that we, for example, see in scenario A are never materialize in this scenario. And then we move to scenario D, which instead is the scenario that no one really wants. This is where the power is concentrated among very few players that own the AI technologies. This is where we have workers that have no agency, and individuals completely lose their ability to shape their own careers or skill development. So some more information on each scenario briefly. So as I said, the scenario A is the one that is the most positive, is the one where we see that jobs are abundant, where actually, because there are less workers than openings available, employers really compete fiercely for talent. And this means that automation shifts here the power dynamic and opens up pathways for higher value roles. This means that workers can concentrate to a higher value position, that routine tasks are automated, and workers can fully pursue purposeful career. In this scenario, human-centric skills take center stage because they complement AI skills. And this is the scenario where companies invest heavily in upskilling. So really here, upskilling, skill development becomes a competitiveness driver for companies. And learning is embedded into daily workflows. So learning is everywhere. We also see that AI personalizes learning at scales, meaning that completely adapts to the specific needs of every worker. And this also opens up possibilities for disadvantaged learners. So overall, this scenario this is the scenario where jobs, workplaces, skill system reinforce each other, and they become more inclusive, responsive, and abundant. Of course, even here, though, there is a risk of digital divide. I mean, there is a risk that those that do not have the right digital skills or that might live in areas with a limited digital infrastructure might be left behind even under this scenario. So the second scenario B is where things start to go south. So here we see that AI disrupts jobs unevenly, and we see the emergence of a two-tier workforce. This means that while there are some AI is used to augment some human capabilities and create more purposeful jobs, there are also areas instead where jobs are instead disappearing, and people end up being in really dead-end role with no possibility of career progression. This is mostly due to the fact that in this scenario, we see that companies and the state retreat from broad workforce development, and they only invest in the already top-skilled talent. And what is quite pressing under this scenario is also that not only skills development then shifts on the individual without any support, and the support from the institutions and employers becomes really unequal. So we see some people are really thriving and some other workers instead are really left behind. And what is alarming under this scenario is that actually the people that are left behind are the most disadvantaged, and here this scenario really compounds disadvantage, meaning that the people that start with less resources, less education, less financial resources, less social capital, that also live in less AI or technological development areas, also are the ones that are being left behind. And this is why, this is also what we mean when we refer to the emergence of these opportunity deserts, of these areas where the infrastructure and institutions are weak. So under this scenario, really we see a two-tier labor market, and really people are sorted into the winners and losers. And here again, the risk is widening inequality and the individual responsibility gaps in terms of skills development. When moving to scenario C, so as I said, this is the one where on paper maybe can kind of sort of like sound it's safe option, but also this is not a sort of like ideal outlook as well, because AI adoption is modest and uneven, so there's no extensive job replacement, there's still value in technical skills, the pressure on companies to invest in upskilling remains modest. We have the traditional learning provider that are still heavily involved in generating most of the learning. And overall, we see that jobs, workplaces, skill system stay stable and manageable. However, here, what we are missing is this opportunity to become more productive, to create systems that are more inclusive, that are innovative. So even here, there is like areas where we identify lost opportunities. And then the last scenario is the most dystopian, of course. This is where AI and automation dominate every sector. We see massive job losses across industry and skill levels. Here, really, workers compete with machine completely, and the majority, all, if not all, most of the human tasks get automated, and people, those few that are still working, do it under non-standard form of contract and employment. This means that workplace quality completely erodes. Workers have no autonomy, they have no voice, they have really little opportunity for advancement. This also means that companies invest in AI skills only for the very small core workforce that is deploying these technologies, and the rest is treated as disposable human capital. Individuals in this scenario are left alone to bear full responsibility for their own skill development amid involuntary frequent career change, and they have no support. Also, the decline in traditional employment also implies deterioration of unionized jobs, and this means also that trade unions under this scenario lose their power to defend and protect their workers. So this is the, like this scenario where I would say everything is a risk, basically. There's almost nothing to safeguard, and where workers are left without support and cannot really cope with changes. So in this slide, you can see how the scenarios compare, across different dimensions. And maybe here the only message that I want to give, for example, if we look at individual responsibility, employers' investment, we see how we go from scenario A, like where even individual responsibility, while shifting, it's co-shared and co-created with employers in scenario A, while we go to complete sole responsibility to scenario G. Here, just a reflection, and the same would go, for example, in terms of the investment in upskilling, reskilling from the employer side. I would say that the only message, I would say that actually, the technology that is deployed is the same, so the approach is the same. It's just actually how what is different is the distribution of the weight, who is left bearing the cost of this technology. And as a final message, out of all this exercise, basically what we wanted to understand were exactly this, what were this tension, which areas we need to pay attention to. And the first one is definitely to look at this wild card of AI. We've seen AI as a dual potential. We've seen AI in scenarios as bringing growth, bringing inclusiveness, bringing wealth, but also we see scenarios instead where AI is deployed to create disparities, to create exclusion, disadvantage. The same can be said for when we reflect on workplace transformation. We've seen how AI can be used to augment people's capability to automate certain routine jobs and tasks, but free people towards higher level roles and more purposeful careers. But at the same time, we've also seen instead scenarios where either workers are split in two, in between winners and losers, and scenarios like the most dystopic, the D, where instead people are completely pushed out of the labor market and pushed out of any opportunity to progress in their careers. We also have already, I also briefly mentioned this issue of the individual responsibility gap. More and more we see that the responsibility for skills development, even if under these more positive scenarios, is shifting to the individual. And even here, the reflection is whether this is really empowering the individual, or we are actually abandoning the individuals to themselves. We also, in terms of learning guidance and counseling transformation, we see how this can be deployed to create flexible and inclusive systems, but it can also be created, as in the most negative scenarios, to completely exclude people. And we've seen that the employment landscape is changing across all scenarios, but again, in some positive ways, such as in scenario A, where this flexibility is at the service of the workers, but instead completely as a destroyful force in scenario B and D. And then finally, the widening inequality, which I would flag as one of the issues that actually is present even in the most positive scenario. So even in the scenario A, where we see growth and inclusiveness, and we see that actually there is the risk of leaving the people that are not well supported and well equipped behind. So just, this is my final slide, I promise. So I would say that all in all, what this exercise taught us is that, first of all, there's no single future that is safe to plan for. We've seen how this, the same force, same technology, same starting point, very different outcomes. It's also essential that we safeguard early against polarization by design. So we need to close digital, geographical, and socioeconomic gaps early. And I think this was mentioned by almost, I guess, all of the speakers of the opening session. We also, I think this also connects with what was discussed earlier with Giovanni's presentation. We've seen how broad investment in upskilling really spreads the benefit widely, and what we call the real fork in the road is really the employer's behavior, like choosing to use this technology and deploy this technology to augment people's capability, to invest in people, really can make the difference. Also for the organization themselves. We've seen then the point that I was just mentioning, that individual responsibility without the right support is not empowerment. We see that human-centric skills grow more valuable even in this more dystopic scenario. And then it is clear that strong social dialogue really tracks the best outcomes. And on a final note, what I would say is really that the choices that we make now are really what will determine the future of tomorrow. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting to see, I would say, how some of the aspects that we did discuss earlier will remain of utmost importance in the future as well across the different scenarios, as for instance, the individual responsibility, the inclusivity of systems, and also the support, just to mention some.